My stepbrother thought he had won as he watched the police drag me out of the house for theft. I will never forget that disgusting smirk on his face. But when the police officer opened the hidden compartment inside the missing necklace found in Ryan's pocket, everyone in the room gasped. Because what emerged wasn't just proof of simple theft. It was a $50 million secret kept hidden for 20 years that would change our lives forever. And in that second, the direction of the handcuffs suddenly changed. You won't believe your ears when you hear what happened that day and the miracle that came out of that necklace. Before we get to that incredible moment where justice was served, please subscribe to the channel and comment justice below. Because what you are about to hear is proof of how patience leads to the greatest salvation. I'm Nancy. I am a 26-year-old nurse living a quiet life in the freezing cold of Denver, Colorado, in a small but warm house I share with my mother. My bond with my mom was always strong until my stepbrother Ryan came into that house. 31-year-old Ryan was someone who wasted his life chasing get-rich-quick dreams, swimming in debt, and bringing trouble with every step. But my mother, oh my mother, despite everything, she wouldn't let anyone say a bad word about her son. The most valuable thing in our house was the locked drawer of the old oak dresser in my mother's bedroom. Inside, years of accumulated gold necklaces, diamond rings left by my grandmother, and those very precious family heirloom bracelets were kept. The key to that drawer was only with my mother, or so we thought. That morning, while sipping my coffee in the kitchen, I was startled by a terrible scream coming from upstairs. It was my mother. I dropped the cup in my hand and ran up, finding my mother crying among empty jewelry boxes on the floor. The drawer hadn't even been forced, but it was completely empty. Just as I was trying to calm my mother down, Ryan appeared at the door. There was fake concern on his face, but a sly glint in his eyes. At a moment I least expected, he pointed his finger at me and threw that slander. "Mom, I didn't want to tell you, but I saw Nancy coming out of your room last night. I know she has debts. She probably took them all." I was too shocked to speak. I didn't have any debt. He was the one swimming in debt, the one with loan sharks at the door. But Ryan was such a professional liar that my mother turned to me. The moment I saw that doubt in her eyes, my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I tried to defend myself. I screamed, "Mom, I would never do that!" But Ryan increased the pressure. "Call the police, Mom! Call them immediately or she'll sell them and run!" When Ryan called the police, he didn't know he was actually preparing his own end. When the police walked through the door, I wiped my tears. I was trembling with fear as the officer walked towards me, but I held my head high. When the officer said, "Miss Miller, there is a complaint against you," Ryan was making a victory sign in the background. I took a deep breath and said the sentence that would change my life. "Officer, search. Search me, my room, everywhere. But if you want to find the real thief, start with the dusty fingerprints behind that dresser." And right at that moment, an announcement from the police officer's radio wiped that smirk right off Ryan's face. The radio crackled with static, and then a voice broke through that made Ryan's face go white as a sheet. "Officer Martinez, we have a match on those pawn shop surveillance photos you sent earlier this morning. The suspect was caught on camera at 3 different locations trying to sell high-end jewelry matching the description of the stolen items. We're sending backup to your location now." Ryan tried to laugh it off nervously. Clearly, whoever that is has nothing to do with this case, but his voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. The lead detective, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Sarah Chen, had already been studying Ryan since she walked through the door. She had 20 years of experience reading guilty faces, and Ryan's face was screaming volumes. Officer Martinez stepped forward and calmly asked Ryan to empty his pockets, and what happened next was something straight out of a movie. Ryan stammered and said he had nothing to hide while his hands shook so badly he could barely reach into his jacket. When he pulled out his wallet, a small velvet pouch fell onto the hardwood floor with a soft thud that echoed like thunder in that silent room. My mother gasped and covered her mouth because she recognized that pouch immediately. It was the special bag she kept her most precious necklace in, the one her own mother had given her on her deathbed, a stunning piece with intricate goldwork and a large center pendant that opened like a locket. Detective Chen bent down and carefully picked up the pouch, and when she opened it, there was the necklace gleaming under the ceiling light like it was mocking Ryan's entire scheme. But what happened next was something none of us could have predicted in a million years. As Detective Chen examined the necklace more closely, her experienced fingers found something unusual about the center pendant. It wasn't just a simple locket like we had all believed for decades. There was a hidden mechanism, a tiny catch so cleverly concealed that you would never find it unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. She pressed it gently, and with a soft click that seemed to stop time itself, a secret compartment opened. Inside that compartment was a folded piece of yellowed paper, so old and delicate it looked like it might crumble at the slightest touch. Detective Chen carefully unfolded it while everyone in the room held their breath, and as she read the contents, her professional composure cracked for just a moment. Her eyes went wide, and she looked up at my mother with an expression that mixed shock with something that looked almost like reverence. "Mrs. Miller," she said slowly, "do you have any idea what this document is?" My mother shook her head, tears still streaming down her face from the emotional roller coaster of the last hour. "I never knew there was anything inside that pendant," my mother said in a whisper. "My mother just told me to keep it safe and never sell it no matter how hard times got." Detective Chen's hands were actually trembling as she held up the document for us to see. "This appears to be a stock certificate," she said, "and based on the company name and the date, this could be worth a substantial amount of money." The certificate was from a small tech company that my grandmother had apparently invested in back in the early 2000s, a company that nobody had ever heard of back then, but that had grown into one of the largest corporations in America. The certificate showed ownership of 50,000 shares, and at that moment, Ryan made the biggest mistake of his entire pathetic life. He lunged forward, trying to grab the certificate from Detective Chen's hands while shouting that it belonged to the family and that he had just as much right to it as anyone else. Officer Martinez moved faster than lightning and had Ryan face down on the floor in handcuffs before he could even touch the paper. The whole scene was surreal, like watching a movie where the villain finally gets what's coming to him, except this was really happening in my mother's bedroom on a cold Tuesday morning in Denver. As they hauled Ryan to his feet, he was screaming about how this wasn't fair, how he was family too, how he deserved a share of whatever that certificate was worth. But Detective Chen cut through his protests with one simple statement that made everyone in the room realize just how deep Ryan's betrayal went. "Mr. Miller," she said coldly, "we have video evidence of you entering 4 different pawn shops over the last 3 days, attempting to sell items that match the exact description of your stepmother's stolen jewelry. We also have testimony from one pawn shop owner who refused your offer and wrote down your license plate number because he suspected the items were stolen. You didn't just try to frame your stepsister for theft. You committed the theft yourself, and now you're going to face the consequences." Ryan's face cycled through every emotion possible, from rage to fear to desperate pleading, but it was too late. The handcuffs were on and his rights were being read, and my mother finally saw her son for exactly what he was, a manipulative criminal who had betrayed the family's trust in the worst possible way. After Ryan was taken away in the police car, Detective Chen sat down with my mother and me at the kitchen table to discuss what happened next. She explained that the stock certificate would need to be authenticated by financial experts, but if it was genuine and those shares were still valid, we were looking at a life-changing amount of money. My mother couldn't stop shaking, whether from the shock of Ryan's betrayal or the possibility of sudden wealth or both, I couldn't tell. I held her hand across the table while Detective Chen made phone calls to financial crime specialists and securities lawyers. The detective was kind enough to stay with us through those first few hours because she knew we were in no state to handle this alone. By late afternoon, we had our first confirmation. A securities attorney named Michael Bradford arrived at our house with a team of experts, and after examining the certificate under special lights and comparing it against historical records, he delivered news that made my mother faint right there in her chair. The certificate was authentic. The shares were still valid and had split multiple times over the years, and at current market value, we were looking at approximately $52 million. $52 million that had been hidden in a necklace pendant for over 20 years, forgotten by everyone except perhaps my grandmother, who had taken the secret to her grave. The next few days were an absolute whirlwind that I still can't fully process even now when I look back on everything that happened. Michael Bradford, the securities attorney, basically moved into our lives temporarily to help us navigate the incredibly complex world of suddenly having more money than we had ever dreamed possible. He brought in accountants, financial advisors, and security consultants because apparently when you're suddenly worth over $50 million, you need an entire team of professionals to make sure you don't lose it all through bad decisions or people trying to take advantage of you. My mother was still in shock, barely speaking for the first 2 days after the discovery, just sitting in her favorite chair by the window and staring out at the snow-covered street like she was waiting to wake up from a dream. Meanwhile, Ryan was sitting in a county jail cell facing multiple felony charges including grand theft, attempted fraud, and filing a false police report. His public defender tried to negotiate some kind of plea deal, but Detective Chin had built such an airtight case against him with the pawn shop videos, the jewelry found in his possession, and testimony from multiple witnesses who had seen him acting suspiciously around the house in the days before the theft that there was really no way out for him. The prosecutor was pushing for the maximum sentence because Ryan had not only stolen from his own family, but had also tried to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my mother by framing me for his crimes. Every time I thought about how close he came to succeeding, how my mother had actually doubted me for those terrible hours before the truth came out, I felt sick to my stomach. But there was something else bothering me even more than Ryan's betrayal, and that was the mystery of why my grandmother had hidden this fortune inside a necklace pendant without telling anyone about it. My mother and I spent hours going through old photo albums and boxes of letters stored in the attic, trying to find any clue about what grandmother had been thinking all those years ago. We found pictures of her as a young woman in the 1950s looking glamorous and confident, and later photos from the 1970s and 80s showing her at various family gatherings always wearing that necklace like it was a part of her. But there were no letters or diary entries explaining the stock certificate, or why she had chosen such an unusual hiding place for something so valuable. It was Michael Bradford who finally helped us piece together the puzzle after doing some historical research into my grandmother's life. He discovered that back in 2001, my grandmother had been working as a secretary for a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley during the early days of the dot-com boom. She had become friends with a young entrepreneur who was trying to get funding for his crazy idea about creating a new kind of software that would revolutionize how businesses managed their data. Most investors thought he was insane and refused to give him money, but my grandmother believed in him and used her life savings of $15,000 to buy shares in his startup company. She made him promise that he would issue her a physical stock certificate rather than just electronic records because she didn't trust computers and wanted something tangible she could hold in her hands. The company struggled for years and almost went bankrupt multiple times, which was probably why my grandmother never mentioned the investment to anyone in the family. She likely thought she had wasted her life savings on a failed dream and was too embarrassed to admit it. But then, in 2008, everything changed when that little software company developed a breakthrough product that suddenly every major corporation in America wanted to buy. The company went public, the stock price exploded, and my grandmother's initial investment of $15,000 had grown into millions. By that point, she was already in her 70s, and maybe she had forgotten about the certificate hidden in her necklace. Or maybe she had kept it secret because she was afraid of what money might do to our family dynamics. Or maybe she had some other reason we would never know because she passed away in 2010 without ever saying a word about the fortune she was leaving behind. Michael Bradford explained to us that this kind of thing happened more often than people realized, with forgotten stock certificates or old bank accounts containing surprising amounts of money being discovered by heirs who had no idea what they were inheriting. In our case, the timing of the discovery was almost miraculous because if Ryan had succeeded in pawning that necklace, the pawn shop owner would have melted it down for the gold value without ever discovering the hidden compartment, and the stock certificate would have been destroyed forever. The fact that he had kept the necklace in his pocket instead of selling it immediately, probably because he was waiting for the heat to die down before trying to pawn it, was the only reason we had found the certificate at all. In a twisted way, Ryan's greed and paranoia had actually saved our family fortune. As the legal process moved forward with authenticating the shares and transferring them into my mother's name, Detective Chen kept us updated on Ryan's case. He had tried to claim that he was only borrowing the jewelry and planned to return it, but the prosecution demolished that defense by showing that he had explicitly told the pawn shop owners he was the rightful owner and had even forged documents claiming the items belonged to him. His own text messages and emails revealed that he had been planning the theft for weeks, carefully watching my mother's routines and waiting for the perfect moment when he could steal everything and blame it on me. He had even researched how to pick the lock on the jewelry drawer and had practiced on similar locks until he could do it quickly and quietly without leaving obvious marks. The most disturbing part of Detective Chen's investigation was discovering that this wasn't Ryan's first attempt at theft from the family. She found evidence that over the past 3 years, small amounts of cash had been disappearing from my mother's purse, valuables had gone missing from around the house, and even some of my personal items had been stolen and sold online. Ryan had been systematically robbing us for years, taking just enough each time that we would notice things were gone, but not enough that we would immediately suspect a family member rather than our own carelessness or misplaced items. He had been a parasite living in our home and feeding off our trust while plotting how he could take everything in one big score and disappear with the money. When my mother learned about the extent of Ryan's long-term betrayal, something broke inside her in a way that was almost frightening to witness. The woman who had always defended her son, no matter what he did, who had made excuses for his failures and believed his lies even when everyone else could see through them, suddenly transformed into someone I barely recognized. She told Detective Chen that she wanted Ryan prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, that she never wanted to see him or speak to him again, and that she was formally disowning him from the family. She even went to the jail where he was being held and told him through the visitor's glass that he was dead to her, that she had no son anymore, and that he would not receive a single penny from grandmother's fortune, no matter how much he begged or how many years he spent in prison thinking about what he had done. Michael Bradford had warned us that family members like Ryan often try to challenge inheritances in court, claiming they deserve a share of any discovered assets. But in this case, Ryan's own criminal actions had destroyed any legal claim he might have had. The stock certificate had been hidden inside jewelry that he had stolen, which meant he had literally tried to steal his own potential inheritance. And Colorado law was very clear that criminals cannot profit from their crimes or claim assets they attempted to steal. Even if Ryan served his time and got out of prison someday, he would never see a cent of the $52 million. And that knowledge was probably more painful to him than the prison sentence itself. As winter turned to spring and the legal paperwork finally cleared, my mother and I found ourselves sitting in Michael Bradford's office signing the documents that would officially transfer the funds into a trust he had set up to protect and manage the money. $52 million after taxes and legal fees became approximately $38 million, which was still an amount so large that my brain couldn't really comprehend it. Michael walked us through the investment strategy he had developed, explaining how the money would be divided between safe bonds, diversified stock portfolios, real estate investments, and a substantial cash reserve that would generate enough passive income for us to live comfortably for the rest of our lives without ever touching the principal. But my mother surprised everyone in that office when she announced what she wanted to do with a significant portion of the money. She had been thinking about grandmother and about the young entrepreneur who had given her that chance to invest in his dreams all those years ago, and she decided that the best way to honor that legacy was to help other people the way grandmother had been helped. She instructed Michael to set up a foundation that would provide startup funding for women entrepreneurs and inventors who were being ignored by traditional venture capital firms. People who had brilliant ideas but lacked the connections or resources to make their dreams reality. She wanted to call it the Margaret Chen Foundation after our grandmother, and she wanted me to help her run it because she said I had inherited grandmother's ability to see potential in people that others overlooked. I was still working as a nurse at Denver General Hospital, and I loved my job and the patients I cared for every day, but the idea of being able to help people on a larger scale through the foundation was incredibly appealing. We decided that I would continue nursing part-time while also taking business classes and learning everything I needed to know about running a charitable foundation. Michael introduced us to other philanthropists and foundation directors who gave us advice and helped us avoid the common mistakes that well-meaning people often make when they suddenly have money and want to give it away effectively. We learned about grant-making, due diligence on funding recipients, measuring social impact, and all the complex regulations governing charitable organizations. The foundation officially launched 6 months after the discovery of the stock certificate, and our first grant went to a single mother in Colorado Springs who had invented a new kind of medical device but couldn't afford the patent fees or prototype development costs. Her device ended up saving lives and getting picked up by a major medical supply company, and she credited our foundation with making her success possible. That moment, when we saw that our money had directly changed someone's life for the better, was when everything finally felt real and right. We had gone from being victims of Ryan's greed to being people who could actually make a difference in the world, and that transformation was worth more than any amount of money. Ryan's trial took place almost a year after his arrest, and by that time, he had lost so much weight and looked so broken that I barely recognized him when they brought him into the courtroom in his orange jumpsuit and chains. His public defender had advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but Ryan's ego wouldn't let him admit what he had done, so he insisted on going to trial and trying to convince a jury that he was somehow innocent despite the mountain of evidence against him. It was painful to watch him on the witness stand making up increasingly ridiculous stories about how someone else must have planted the jewelry in his pocket and how the pawnshop videos must have been doctored and how I was actually the mastermind behind everything and had somehow framed him. The jury saw through his lies in about 20 minutes of deliberation and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge who sentenced Ryan was a stern woman in her 60s who had clearly heard enough of his excuses and justifications. She told him that she had seen many criminals come through her courtroom over the years, but rarely had she encountered someone who had betrayed their family so completely and shown so little remorse for the pain they had caused. She sentenced him to 12 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 8 years, and she ordered him to pay full restitution to my mother for all the items he had stolen over the years, which amounted to over $70,000, including the value of the jewelry he had tried to pawn. Of course, Ryan had no money and no way to pay that restitution from prison, but the order would follow him for the rest of his life, and his wages would be garnished if he ever managed to get a job after his release. My mother didn't attend the sentencing hearing because she said she had already wasted enough of her life on Ryan and didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing her in the courtroom. I went because Detective Chen had asked me to be there in case the defense tried any last-minute tricks, but also because I needed to see that final chapter close with my own eyes. When the judge read the sentence and the bailiffs led Ryan away, he turned back and stared at me with such hatred in his eyes that it actually made me shiver. He mouthed something that looked like, "This isn't over," but I knew it was just the desperate threat of a broken man who had lost everything and was looking for someone to blame besides himself. As I walked out of the courthouse that day into the bright Colorado sunshine, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. For months, I had been waiting for Ryan to somehow escape justice, for some technicality to let him go free, for him to find a way to hurt us one more time. But now, he was going to be locked away for years, and by the time he got out, I would be in my late 30s and my mother would be in her 70s, and hopefully, we would have built such good lives for ourselves that whatever petty revenge he might try to take wouldn't matter anymore. Detective Chen met me on the courthouse steps and shook my hand, telling me she was glad to see justice served and that she hoped our family could finally find some peace. The foundation was growing faster than we had ever imagined, with applications coming in from women entrepreneurs all over the country who had heard about what we were doing and wanted a chance to have their ideas funded. We hired a small staff, including a former venture capitalist named Jennifer Wu, who taught us how to properly evaluate business plans and identify which proposals had real potential versus which ones were just wishful thinking. My mother threw herself into the work with an energy I hadn't seen from her in years, attending pitch meetings and networking events and mentoring the women whose projects we funded. She said it made her feel like she was finally living up to grandmother's legacy and doing something meaningful with the gift we had been given. I continued working part-time as a nurse because I discovered that I didn't want to completely leave behind the hands-on work of caring for patients, even though I now had enough money that I never needed to work another day in my life if I didn't want to. There was something deeply satisfying about being at someone's bedside during their most vulnerable moments, and knowing that I was making a direct difference in their recovery and comfort. My coworkers at the hospital knew about the inheritance by this point because the story had been covered in the local news, but they treated me the same as always, which I appreciated more than I could express. The head nurse even joked that I was probably the only millionaire in Colorado who was still emptying bedpans and doing wound care, but that was exactly why I was doing it, because I didn't want money to change who I was at my core. One of the most unexpected developments came about 18 months after the discovery of the stock certificate, when I received a letter forwarded through Michael Bradford's office from someone I had never heard of named Thomas Chen. The letter explained that Thomas was the entrepreneur who had founded the software company that had made our fortune, and he was also a distant cousin of my grandmother who had reconnected with her during her time working in Silicon Valley. He said that grandmother had made him promise to never reveal her investment to the family until after she had passed away because she wanted to see if her children and grandchildren could build good lives through their own hard work and character without relying on inherited wealth. She had apparently planned to tell us about the stock certificate in her will, but she had died suddenly of a heart attack before she could update her legal documents, and Thomas had assumed that we had found the certificate shortly after her death. Thomas's letter went on to explain that he had only recently learned about Ryan's theft and our discovery of the hidden fortune when one of his assistants had seen the news story and brought it to his attention. He wanted to meet with us to share stories about grandmother and to thank us in person for believing in him all those years ago when nobody else would. My mother was thrilled at the possibility of connecting with someone who had known grandmother during a part of her life we knew almost nothing about. So we arranged to meet Thomas at a restaurant in downtown Denver on a Saturday afternoon in early autumn. Thomas Chen turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his late 50s with kind eyes and an aura of quiet success that came from having built something meaningful rather than just making money. He brought along old photographs of grandmother from her Silicon Valley days, looking young and confident and so different from the grandmother I remembered from my childhood. He told us stories about how she had been the heart of the venture capital office, how she had given him advice that went far beyond just investing money, and how she had predicted that his company would succeed, even during the darkest days when bankruptcy seemed inevitable. He also told us something that made my mother cry right there in the restaurant, which was that grandmother had said her greatest wish was that her investment would eventually help her family, not just financially, but spiritually, by showing them that taking risks on people and believing in dreams could change the world. Thomas then surprised us by offering to match whatever amount we put into the Margaret Chen Foundation, effectively doubling our ability to help women entrepreneurs. He said it would be his way of paying forward the faith that grandmother had shown in him, and he wanted to honor her memory by helping create more success stories like his own. My mother and I looked at each other across the table and didn't need to discuss it because we both knew exactly what grandmother would have wanted us to do. We told Thomas that we would be honored to have him as a partner in the foundation, and we spent the rest of that afternoon planning how we could expand our grant programs and reach even more people who needed just one person to believe in their potential. The years that followed the discovery of grandmother's hidden fortune transformed my life in ways I never could have imagined that terrible morning when Ryan tried to destroy me with his lies. The Margaret Chen Foundation grew into one of the most respected startup funding organizations in the country, with over 200 women entrepreneurs receiving grants that helped them launch businesses, secure patents, and turn their ideas into reality. Some of those businesses failed, as startups often do, but many succeeded beyond our wildest expectations, creating jobs and innovations that made people's lives better. We tracked every dollar we gave out and measured our impact not just in financial returns, but in lives changed, families supported, and dreams realized. My mother became something of a celebrity in philanthropic circles, giving speeches at conferences and writing articles about the importance of supporting women in business and technology. She always told the story of grandmother and the hidden stock certificate, explaining how one woman's quiet faith in an unknown entrepreneur had rippled forward through time to create opportunities for hundreds of other women decades later. She said that grandmother had taught her the most important lesson anyone could learn, which was that real wealth wasn't about accumulating money for yourself, but about using whatever resources you had to lift up others and create something that would outlast your own lifetime. As for me, I eventually left my nursing job to work full-time at the foundation, though I stayed involved with Denver General Hospital as a board member and major donor who helped fund new equipment and programs. I discovered that I had a real talent for identifying promising entrepreneurs and helping them refine their pitches and business plans, probably because my nursing background had taught me to listen carefully to what people weren't saying and to recognize when someone had the determination and resilience to push through obstacles. Jennifer Wu became my mentor and close friend, teaching me everything she knew about venture capital and startup ecosystems, and together we built a team that could evaluate hundreds of applications and find the hidden gems that other investors missed. Ryan served 8 years of his 12-year sentence before being released on parole, and true to form, he immediately tried to contact my mother demanding money and claiming that he had changed and deserved a second chance. My mother's response was to forward his letters directly to his parole officer without reading them and to renew the restraining order that prevented him from coming within 500 feet of either of us. She had spent years working with a therapist to process the betrayal and the guilt she felt for not seeing Ryan's true nature sooner, and she had finally reached a place of peace where she could acknowledge that she had done her best as a mother, but that Ryan's choices were his own responsibility. She told me once that the hardest part wasn't the theft or even the attempt to frame me, but rather the realization that she had wasted so many years defending someone who had never deserved her loyalty. The last I heard, Ryan was working minimum wage jobs and living in a halfway house, still bitter about the fortune that could have been his if only he hadn't been so greedy and impatient. Part of me felt sorry for him because I knew he would spend the rest of his life thinking about those $52 million and how close he had come to stealing them before his own arrogance and criminality destroyed his chance. But mostly, I felt grateful that his betrayal had happened when it did, because if he had waited longer or been smarter about his theft, he might have gotten away with it, and my mother and I would have lost not just the money, but also the opportunity to honor grandmother's legacy in the way she would have wanted.